My recording. So I am so excited that we're finally coming to an end with Habakkuk. I know we have learned a lot. I have learned a lot from Habakkuk. And this is good because this is the part that's good, even though we're going to have a little bit of judgment here today. So in review, we did the first 7 verses last time, Habakkuk. And there's the outline of what I did up till that means that we did the first 7 verses there. That was the supplication and adoration, and now we're going to go into
exaltation.
the exaltation, and that concludes Habakkuk. So, without going into all the review of what we did last time, we'll move right into today's portion, which is the exaltation. And we start with Habakkuk 3:8.
Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers, or your indignation against the sea, when you rode on your horses, on your chariot of salvation?
Yes. Okay, now remember, this is a prophet speaking. So I know that sounds confusing when we read it in English because this doesn't make any sense to us. What are we talking about? God is angry with the rivers and the sea? Obviously, that's not the point here. What the prophet is doing in his prophetic and Hebrew poetic way of writing, he's bringing us meaning us as people that have already thousands of years after this event took place, but also the people of Judah. He wanted Judah to go back to the Exodus because something significant happened in the Exodus. They were slaves in Egypt. God delivered them with miraculous, wonderful miracles to show Pharaoh, to show Egypt, and to show Israel that God is the God of heaven, is the God, not those idols of Egypt and all that sort of thing. So now they crossed the Red Sea. And what was important about crossing the Red Sea is they went through a type of baptism of water because they had to go through the water.
Exactly.
And then when they crossed over, now there was something new that was happening. Egypt was now dead. And literally, because when Pharaoh's army tried to cross, the waters came on top of them. And that was where the judgment came. He's not angry with the waters, but he's using the waters. Remember, a water can be a blessing or it can destroy you.
That's right, the shin.
It was a blessing to Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, because they were literally being baptized into a new life as being the people of God, with God, their king, and leaving the bondage of Egypt and sin and idolatry and all that other stuff that they had basically lost their faith for the most of them. And God had to, 40 years, had to get them ready for this new land and this new promised land that he had for them, that he had promised all the way back to Abraham. So now you see what the relationship, and by the way, in English you see it as well as in Hebrew, the 3 different words, and I put them in Hebrew there on the outline, for wrath, anger, and indignation. Those are 3 different Hebrew words, which makes the Hebrew of Habakkuk very poetic. In English, we don't see that as well, but you do see that there are 3 different words. When you rode on horses, on your chariots of salvation. And we all know what that
salvation is Yeshua.
There was a transition, and we already explained all that, and now I just wanted to make clarification. The chariots of Pharaoh were stuck and drowned before the children of Israel. And God comes in his share of Yeshua. He's the one that comes in and he fought for them. Israel didn't have to defeat the Egyptians. God did it for them. So now I change to a different version. This is the Darby translation of verse 3:9.
Thy bow has made naked, the rods of discipline sworn according to thy word, Selah. Thou didst cleave the earth with rivers.
I know I mean, this is a very difficult thing to understand. I mean, we read this and it goes so fast and we have just no idea what we just read. So I try to break this apart in pieces so that we can digest them and maybe get a better understanding. And when you look at the different versions of the scripture, you'll find that there are different ways that they interpreted this. You read one and you read another one. It's like, are they really reading it from the same Hebrew? One of the reasons why such diversity in interpretations is because the Hebrew here is very difficult. It's very difficult, not to those guys in Judah back then, but to us moving forward, try to understand those Hebrew words that were no longer used even by modern Jewish Hebrew speakers. So let's look at the Hebrew prophetic interpretation patterns to see what's going on here, to get an idea. When you see naked here, that's why I use it Darby, because some of the other ones do not use the word naked. Not always, but very often relates to shame. And in this situation, we're talking about the shame that Judah had brought upon themselves because of their sinful behavior that caused God to have to do what he had to do with them. He couldn't leave them in the land, in the promised land, because they had already gone way beyond where they could be, and God could do anything with them while they were in the land. So that sets up a little bit of a light on the interpretation of what he's talking about in here. When he's talking about this bow here, he's talking about a bow that is different from man's weapons of war of that time. Because the bow of God, and he uses a Hebrew word here, the rods of discipline. Some of them interpret it as the arrows, but he used the word rods here because compared to the arrows of warfare of that time, God's arrows look like spears compared to tiny little arrows, because he's always stronger. God is always stronger than what man. The weapons of God are much stronger than any weapons man-made. And he's trying to make a relationship here. And this is the rods of discipline coming from the Lord. Relates to judgment, but with the purpose of making things right. And that was the message that I gave last week concerning God's judgment. We need to look at God's judgment different from the way that we have been accustomed to look at judgment as being a punishment. Yes, there will be suffering, but the suffering is to bring something better. When you go to have surgery, to have a cancer removed, it's painful. It's terrible. I've never gone through it. There's a lot of people that have gone through that. They can tell you how hard it is. But if you don't remove it, it will kill you.
It will kill you.
But, I don't want to make too much of a connection with cancer or that sort of thing, but just wanted to tell you, when you have surgery, you do it for a reason. You do it to fix something that if left untreated, it's going to be a lot worse than if you just go through the pain. And that's what Judah is getting ready to go through. And then it says, I like this interpretation better because it says, cleave the earth with rivers. Some of them translations, it's almost like he's doing something that the rivers are going to cause some kind of problem. But no, actually, it's bringing life to a dry land is what the more prophetic interpretation of that part is. I know these are difficult. I'm sorry, but I didn't write the scriptures. I'm only trying to make sense of them with the tools that we have available today to interpret such scriptures. So here it is, God's loving kindness and always wanting to bring life to his people, never to hurt his people.
Let me just
Yeah, go ahead.
add a little piece in here that because we've been studying the end times, and we know that there's a tribulation coming, and there's one part caused by man, the situations or whatever, but then comes the one of God, and what he wants is to have the people turn to him, to call to him and have salvation. And that's exactly what God wants. When these things happen, and that's when we see in the end of the tribulation period that Israel will recognize the Lord and will give their life. And that's what the whole purpose is. Anyway, that's
the ultimate. That's what ultimately what God is accomplishing. So go ahead and 3:10.
The mountains watched and trembled. Onward swept the raging waters. The mighty deep cried out, lifting its hands to the Lord.
Again, very difficult to interpret, and that's why I used a New Living Translation. I changed another translation. Why? Because looking at the Hebrew, I saw that this one actually brought some things that I thought were easier for me to understand. And basically we're dealing with, of course, we know from mountains, we know that most of the time Bible prophecy is talking about Jerusalem. But because here we're not talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about the nations, the center of government in the nations. So the mountains here, because of the context of who he's talking about, it cannot be Jerusalem. It says the mountains watched and trembled. He didn't say the mountain like one, like singular. That gives you a hint that we're not talking about Jerusalem, but we're talking about the nations. The mountains are with the seats of government in each nation. And judgment is coming for the sake of healing and restoration. And that's why why the language of this verse is the way it is. So let's go to 11 and 12.
Sun and moon stood in their places. They went away at the light of your arrows, at the radiance of your gleaming spear. In indignation you marched through the earth. In anger you trampled the nations.
Okay, here I changed translations again to the New American Standard because it actually matches the Hebrew actually better. It doesn't say the sun and the moon, it says sun and moon. So that's one of the reasons why it shows it. Stood in their places. They went away at the light of your arrows. Now, sun and moon, two things. Well, in light of prophecy, sun and moon is source of light, right? One by the day, one governs the day, one governs the night. When you look at sun and moon in Bible prophecy, don't look at astrology or any of that stuff. Look at Bible prophecy and how sun and moon are used in the scriptures. And then there is another word here that's very interesting. He said, at the radiance of your gleaming spear. Now remember, he's still talking about shedding some light on what's going on. The Babylonians are coming. Okay, there's judgment coming. And it says, in indignation you marched through the earth. In anger you trampled the nations. Okay, we're talking about judgment here. So this radiance, I think I underlined it because the word is noga, which doesn't mean anything to us, but in Hebrew, actually, it's a very, very bright light. And the comparison that I have with other scriptures where there was a situation with a very bright light is, remember when Paul saw that bright light and said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Mm-hmm. Okay, it blinded him. It was so bright. It's brighter than the sun. Also, at the Mount of Transfiguration, the Peter and John and James, they saw this Jesus with Moses and with Elijah, and they were brighter. Their garments were brighter than anything that could possibly be made by on earth. There was a radiance that took place, and that's the reason I chose this, because radiance explained that better than the other translations. So 13.
You went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. Selah.
Okay, now we're starting to now shift over from the judgment to what God ultimately wants to do, the salvation of his people, for the salvation of your anointed. And of course, we know salvation is always, the root word for it is Yeshua. Or there's another word that is actually even more of a root than Yeshua, and that's the word that is used here, which I didn't put it in here. Maybe I should have. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, lying him bare from thigh to neck. Salah. And of course, I wanted to mention, we've seen this already once before, and this is the second time we see Salah. And so when you see Salah, it's always like stop and meditate on what has just been said. He's giving us an important message here concerning God's salvation. And by the way, you're anointed, and I put the Hebrew on this one because I thought this is great. It uses the Aleph Tab. Aleph Tab Meshihaka, which means you're anointed, which is from the root word Messiah or Mashiach. It's the same word, except it's using the tense from salvation to anointed. We're talking about Mashiach. So that's what makes a difference. And again, when you look at the Hebrew, you always look for those little signs that God gives us so that you can see his signature in his word. And we all know that Aleph Tab is always one of those pointers. It's not part of Hebrew grammar. It's part of biblical interpretation tools, because when you have the Aleph Tab, something is very, very important that God wants to show us. And along with the Hebrew puns and all the other, and I mean, I can go into a lot of detail of all the different things that God has done in the Hebrew scriptures that anybody else that tries to imitate them, like the Talmud or whatever, that don't have the same signature. They have used modern computers trying to figure this out, and nothing comes out like the Hebrew scriptures do. Where they can count so many letters in the Hebrew in a verse, on a particular word, and take that letter, go back, and then do that, and see backwards and forward, and all of a sudden it gives you an interpretation of that scripture. I have a whole book dedicated to that, and it's a very complex subject. I won't get into it, but just to let you know that they have tried it with modern computers and they cannot get any. How in the world did these prophets knew that when they were, the words that they were writing actually could explain themselves, not only by the Hebrew letters, but also by counting backwards and forwards so many letters, and then a word comes out, and the word always explains the scriptures. And guess who shows up a lot? I mean, not a lot, the majority of the time, Yeshua. It's amazing. Yeshua is pointed out in the whole script, in the scriptures, in the Hebrew scriptures, again and again and again, and that is impossible for any human to do. Even computers today can't do it. Their computers are useful in revealing it, but not in creating it.
Well, that just proves there's divine intervention.
Yeah.
Outside, you're talking about 66 books through different thousands of years, 44 authors. You can't tell me they contrived to get that all to fit.
It's too bad that we don't have all the New Testament in Hebrew, because if we did,
It will hopefully we'll find it all.
well, we have Hebrew Matthew, and we have portions of
Yeah.
John and so on,
Yeah.
but we don't have the complete
Yeah.
Hebrew original New
Yeah.
Testament.
Not the original.
If you do, I think maybe that's one of the things that they're going to discover later on, that's going to bring the Jews to Yeshua, the ones that don't believe in him right now. I'm talking about the Israel, the nation right there, physically right now, that rejects the Messiah. Eventually, I think they're going to have enough evidence that they're going to come to another conclusion that Jesus had to be the Messiah.
Yeah.
Right now, you can try to show them, you can reason with them, and it's just like pulling teeth. Some do, and by the way, when I say pulling teeth, more and more are coming to Yeshua. And that's got all this, either both the religious and the secular Jews that don't believe, very nervous, because they don't know what to do with this. Kind of like the same way the Muslims are leaving Islam. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of Muslims are leaving Islam.
Yes, they are.
They don't want you to know that.
Yeah.
They thought they had everything under the control, because the birth rate of the Muslims was so much higher than the non-Muslims, that they thought we will just take over the world just by that alone. And then when they started losing their Muslims in droves, it no longer that was true. And they're very concerned about that. So 14 and 15 to 15.
You pierced with his own arrows the heads of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, rejoicing as if to devour the poor in secret.
Yeah, I can get into all this, but this is basically the judgment on the Babylonians. And it's just, it's no need to me to explain. That one's self-explanatory, I think. So we can move on to 15.
You triumphed the sea with, you trampled the sea with your horses, the surging of mighty waters.
Okay, here we go back to verse 8. The same imagery is here of crossing the Red Sea, looking back to the destruction of Pharaoh's army. That's what the prophet is going back. He went 3:15, went back to verse 8, and then we can continue with 16.
I hear, and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. Yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon people who invade us. Wow.
The prophet who had so much difficulty in the first 2 chapters with understanding why God had to what was using the Babylonians. It's still painful for the prophet, but he recognizes that this is necessary, and his language and his attitude and everything has changed now. But he's still, that just because he understands what God is doing, it doesn't make it any easier for him to accept that it was necessary for God to do what he had to do, that was going to be so hard for the Jewish people. 70 years of exile. That was removed from the land, exposed to a foreign nation that was steep in idolatry, unkind. Remember, the Babylonians and the Assyrians are right next to each other, and they're very little difference between the two of them in their attitude and their violence and their cruelty. They were very cruel. The Babylonians and the Assyrians were extremely cruel. So Habakkuk knew what was going to happen. He wasn't happy with that, but he recognizes now that it needed to be done. This last part, where I just figured that I don't need to explain it at all, because we all heard it and we understand it, and we conclude with that one.
Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the field, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. To the choir master with string instruments. Choir master.
Okay. We have all heard those, right? I mean, we're very familiar with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no need for me to explain any of that, other than you can see the complete turnaround on the prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And now he is exalting. Now he sees what God is doing. And then in red, I put strength, which we all know the Hebrew word for that. You can read it.
Yeah.
Hayil.
Yeah. Okay. Like
Who else was a Hayil?
The virtuous woman.
Yeah.
Proverbs 31.
Mm-hmm.
Strength, and it's the word Hayil here.
Yeah.
And I thought I pointed out because I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because you don't see it in English. So that concludes Habakkuk.